politics and economics of all of this with the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, Rushanara Ali, and Tim Pitt, Special Advisor to the former Chancellors Philip Hammond and Sajid Javid. They both join us live. Tim Pitt, let's start with you. The Chancellor needed to respond to the big fiscal as well as the inequality challenges created by the pandemic. Did he succeed?
Yeah, look, I think the Chancellor made two major judgments, both of which I think are right. I think the first is, really big stimulus package over the next year, 60 billion to support the economy through the end of the COVID crisis. That's much more generous than lots of people expected, and is really sizable by historic standards, much bigger, for example, than Alistair Darling's stimulus during the height of the financial crisis. And then the second big call he made, which were some really pretty big tax rises, both personal and business tax rises, to get the public finances back on a sustainable path. But the key thing there is that they don't kick in for a couple of years. And I think those are the right judgments. They're the right judgments economically. Big support while the economy needs it this year and next, but with a medium-term plan to fix the public finances. But I think it's the right judgment politically. It reinforces the Tories' reputation for sound management of the public finances, but primarily raising tax rather than cutting spending, which is where I think the public are. And I think that leaves some pretty difficult questions for Labour. OK. Rushanara Ali,
generous and presenting the government as being on a sound financial footing in the years to come. What did you think?
Well, I think that he failed both tests, actually, on tackling inequality as well as the fiscal challenge. And what we needed was a much bigger stimulus package, thinking about the long-term economic recovery. You've in your report, you've talked about the 3% hit on our economy because of the pandemic, but also there's a 4% hit because of the Brexit trade agreement that's been negotiated in the longer term. So if you combine those hits on our economy, we need a very radical response to generating growth and getting people back into work. We've got over 600,000 young people who are unemployed. The government's programme only has got 2,000 young people into work. So some of the proposals that Rishi Sunak has announced in the past and is announcing today can sound good to people, but when you scratch the surface, you find that actually they don't deliver what they're supposed to. Some of the other changes, like the extension of furlough, of course, are welcome, but people are going to ask the question, what happens after that? So what we need is rapid growth so that we can get people back to work, increase the tax revenue so that we can start paying down the debt. But I do feel that this is a kind of neither here nor there budget. And your teacher really spoke for the nation when he talked about the failure to recognise the contribution of public services, our NHS, our local government, our police, our schools. And they don't know what's going to happen. And many of them are going to have facing cuts. Local authorities are having to make cuts because the government promised them money to deal with this crisis, including my local authority, which is short of 30 million.
Let's put some of those points to Tim Pitt. So when we hear someone like Jerry Glazier saying that the role of the public sector workers and education and public services, all those things that the government were praising and have praised throughout the pandemic, really nothing has been done to help them directly.
Well, I mean, a huge amount of money has been poured in the short term into the NHS and into the school system to help through the pandemic. I absolutely accept that the kind of next big challenge for the Chancellor is going to be thinking about the long-term spending settlements for public services. There'll be a spending review due later this year, and I think, personally, I think that it's very clearly going to need more money to deal with things like the backlog in the NHS, to deal with kind of catch-up teaching in schools. I think that is the big challenge facing the Chancellor next. But the short-term priority had to be for this budget, absolutely right, focusing on ensuring that there's going to be a robust recovery. And I think that was the right focus for today.
Well, let's just stay with you, Tim Pitt, and look at the corporation tax rise, which is obviously the signature decision here in this budget. The first Chancellor to raise corporation tax since Dennis Healey in 1974. Does this feel to you like we're seeing a kind of new phase of UK economic history?
Well, I mean, it is relatively unusual for Conservative chancellors to do big tax raising budgets. It's not unheard of. If you think back to Ken Clarke and Norman Lamont in the 90s, to Geoffrey Howe in 1981. But I do think we're seeing a change in approach from the Conservatives. If you look at the way that they approach the fiscal consolidation after the financial crisis, spending cuts did the vast majority of the work then. This time, it's clearly going to be tax rises which are going to do the heavy lifting. As I say, I think that is the right approach. I think that is where the public are. I think there is a lot of pressure on spending. So I think it's the right thing to do. But it is.
And do you expect more tax rises? Do you think that given this shift that we should expect more tax rises?
Well, I think a lot of it will depend on how the recovery pans out. If you look at the kind of OBR numbers today. Actually, if the forecast comes, if the core forecast they've set out today kind of bears out, the Chancellor probably wouldn't need to raise any more tax than now. And I think there are also arguments the Bank of England's forecast is more optimistic from the OBR, which would be even more helpful. But I do think there are going to be significant spending pressures. Okay. So if that growth doesn't come through, then some more tax rises might be needed.
So let's turn back to Rushanara Ali. I mean, the OBR is also saying that the economy will return to pre-COVID levels 6 months earlier. That suggests that the policies that the government has followed are effective.
Well, look, this is assuming and hoping that those predictions are going to come true. But what we've seen in the last year is that there are great uncertainties. Although the vaccine is a game changer, there are lots of unknowns about whether new variants could set us back. And if you listen to the economists, if you look at some of the commentary we've seen about what to look out for, and if you look at what the Americans are doing, for instance, where they're putting a much bigger stimulus package in terms of the recovery, we need to look at those aspects.
It's a difficult comparison to make, though, isn't it? I mean, they're very, very different economies, very different countries.
Of course they are. But if you look in terms of the proportion and scale, it's a very, very big response. And what I'm saying is that we should prioritize growth as a way out of this. I'm not saying growth will be enough to pay what we've had to spend during the last year, but it needs to play a much bigger role so that we can prevent the pain of increasing taxes unnecessarily and also not have the kind of austerity that we saw. And now, Tim's saying we're not going to have austerity, but what we are saying is tax rises such as council tax, which is affecting ordinary people that this Chancellor has introduced. So he talks about levelling up, but what we're seeing is that ordinary people are also being hit by this budget.
Labour MP Rushanara Ali, who sits on the Treasury Select Committee, and Tim Pitt, Special Advisor to former Chancellors Philip Hammond and Sajid Javid. Thanks both for joining us.